The summit of the Mountain of Shifting Winds was empty. The dampening array, abandoned by the Shadow Walkers, pulsed uselessly at the base. Shingai was already gone, a blur of motion utilizing the newly acquired Celestial Gale Step. This technique allowed him to exploit the mountain's chaotic spiritual environment. He moved across the jagged terrain not by running, but by riding the currents of spiritual wind, transforming hostile energy into rapid propulsion. His speed was terrifying, far exceeding his previous velocity. The Shadow Walkers, relying on ground tracking, were momentarily left behind. But the freedom came at a psychological cost. The Celestial Gale Step required perfect spiritual silence, amplifying the Star Eater blade's incessant internal lament. "Faster, little god," the blade whispered, its sorrow now a co-pilot in his mind. "Flee the light, for only the shadows recognize your worth." Shingai drove the doubt back, focusing on the celestial map. His next destination was the River of Silent Tears, a legendary landmark of mourning. The prophecy was his only true compass. The God-Shatterer must not rest until the wandering path intersects with the shadowed abyss. He descended the mountain quickly, exiting the zone of chaotic energy and entering the vast, arid plains of the ascetic. These plains were flat, monotonous, and utterly exposed to place, where concealment was impossible and visibility stretched for hundreds of miles. His only advantage was his speed, and the Shadow Walkers' delayed reaction to his new technique. He had perhaps an hour before they could recalibrate their hunt. He ran, feeling the deep, cold exhaustion settle back into his bones. His power was immense, but the maintenance of that power was draining. He risked a moment to check his stores. His medicinal pellets were nearly depleted. The next nexus point had to yield not just power, but a sustainable energy source. The Star Eater demanded sorrow. He knew the River of Silent Tears would provide it in abundance. According to the ancient texts, the river was where cultivators from the fallen dynasties went to commit ritual suicide, preserving their final grief in the flowing water. It was a place where physical water was replaced by condensed, purified sorrow, a terrifying thought. He saw the first sign of the Shadow Walkers, 3 wisps of inky black smoke rising far behind him, moving with unnatural speed. They were using a technique called the Void Stride, a parallel to his own, but far more stable and controlled. They were gaining ground. Shingai poured more ki into the Celestial Gale Step. The wind howled around him, but the spiritual pressure on his Dancian was immense. He was pushing his reserves past the point of safety. He could not afford to slow down. He noticed that the Shadow Walkers were no longer moving as a unit. One was slightly ahead of the others. This was Shadow Walker Beta, likely the fastest or most aggressive of the 3. A higher-risk, higher-reward tactic to force a confrontation. Beta began to gain rapidly, closing the distance from 3 miles to 2 in mere minutes. Shingai knew he had to lose him in the terrain ahead, or be forced into a costly fight before reaching the river. The plains of the ascetic ended abruptly at the beginning of the petrified forest, a landscape of ancient crystallized trees. These stone trees were razor-sharp, their branches formed of crystalline quartz, making navigation deadly. He entered the forest, his robes snagging on the rough crystal. He was forced to abandon the Celestial Gale Step for sheer acrobatic agility. The shift in movement was immediate. Beta, who was using the Void Stride across the open terrain, was now hampered by the dense crystal field. Shingai used the labyrinthine structure to his advantage, placing obstacles and using misdirection to confuse the assassin's tracking. He focused his resonance sight, using the spiritual echo of the crystal structure to mask his own signature. Beta materialized 50 yards behind him, silent and utterly still, cloaked in a shadow that seemed to drink the meager light. The Shadow Walker was taller than Shingai, wielding a pair of short, curved obsidian daggers, weapons designed for quiet, instantaneous death. Beta did not speak. They simply moved, a terrifying burst of speed that tore the intervening space apart. Shingai did not retreat. He drew the Star Eater blade, the obsidian surface gleaming dangerously in the diffused light. The blade's consciousness surged with excitement, recognizing the impending conflict as an opportunity for more sorrow. Shingai had only one chance, to strike with the full power of the sky-shattering form, focused into a narrow path, unleash the strike. It was not a grand cleave, but a focused, lightning-fast thrust aimed at the assassin's heart. Beta was not expecting such raw, focused power. The Shadow Walker had anticipated a chase, not a suicidal confrontation. The daggers met the Star Eater. The resulting shockwave was contained by the dense crystal, which vibrated with a high-pitched whine. The force shattered Beta's concentration. The Shadow Walker was hurled backward into a thicket of quartz branches. Shingai did not escape unscathed. The impact bruised his bones and sent a shockwave of pain through his danjin. Beta rose instantly, unfazed by the pain, but the attack had bought Shingai's precious seconds of reprieve. He pressed his advantage, using the shattered momentum to execute a series of high-speed bounds deeper into the crystal forest. He knew Beta would pursue relentlessly. Shadow Walker's determination was cold, professional, and terrifyingly efficient. Shingai finally burst through the dense crystal thicket and stopped. Before him lay the river of silent tears. It was not a river of water, nor ice, nor even liquid ki. It was a vast, slow-moving current of condensed, transparent spiritual energy. This energy was colorless, but pulsed with the heavy, inescapable pressure of profound, ancient grief. The celestial map diagram was clear. The river was a nexus point for harvesting emotional residue, transforming sorrow into usable spiritual strength. He saw the nexus point itself, a massive submerged altar at the very center of the spiritual flow. To reach it, he had to immerse himself fully in the river of silent tears. He knelt at the bank, feeling the cold, mental weight of the sorrow pressing against his skin like a physical substance. Behind him, Beta emerged from the crystal trees, daggers held low, ready for the final execution. Shingai knew he had to enter the river immediately. It was no time for meditation or slow adjustment. He took a single, deliberate step into the current. The moment his feet touched the transparent energy, a tidal wave of grief slammed into his consciousness. It was not his own sorrow. It was the collective despair of all the failed cultivators and vanquished heroes who had perished here. He saw flashes of memory, a father mourning his lost daughter, an emperor falling to treachery, a warrior watching his entire clan burn. The sheer volume of emotion threatened to drown his mind, ripping away his sanity and self-identity. The Star Eater blade began to sing a triumphant, maddened song in response, greedily devouring the foreign sorrow. This is the feast. Let the grief fill us. Let the power become absolute. The blade shrieked internally. Shanghai gritted his teeth, forcing himself to remain conscious amidst the storm of despair. He used the celestial map as a mantra. He focused on the geometric purity of the cosmic diagrams, attempting to carve a path of sanity through the deluge of grief. Beta, seeing Shingai, frozen by the emotional current, took his opportunity. The Shadow Walker lunged, a final, lethal strike aimed at Shingai's exposed neck. The daggers cut the air silently. Shingai could not move physically. He was locked in the spiritual war with the river, just as the daggers were inches from his throat. A deep, resonant memory broke through the river's flow, the sorrow of his master. He saw his master's final moments, not of defeat, but of defiant acceptance, shielding Shingai from the Imperial Flame Order. This memory was a shield. It was his own sorrow, purer and colder than the others, and it provided a temporary anchor. Shingai used this specific, personal pain to fuel an unprecedented surge of the God-shattering heart technique. He didn't move the Star Eater. He used the emotional key to create a sudden, localized energy field, the heart shield of desolate truth. The shield was not physical, was a wall of absolute icy determination forged from his master's sacrifice. Beta's dagger struck the shield. The assassin recoiled instantly, his mind momentarily stunned by the sheer, focused intensity of the grief. The Shadow Walker knew that pain was power. Shingai had weaponized his inherited tragedy. The brief moment of distraction was all Shingai needed. He pushed forward deeper into the river, toward the submerged altar. Beta, realizing the danger of the energy field, halted the attack. The two other Shadow Walkers were finally emerging from the crystal forest. Shingai reached the massive, cold granite altar. He placed his hands upon its surface, and the river of silent tears surged around him. The altar acted as a spiritual condenser. The collective sorrow of the river was violently pulled into his Dancian through his hands. This influx was exponentially greater than the spiritual turbine, a chaotic torrent of mental and spiritual destruction. His body convulsed as his mind fought to process the deluge of despair. He felt the weight of 10,000 suicides crush his soul. But within this chaos, the Star Eater blade achieved perfect harmony. It was saturated, fully fed by the massive infusion of purified grief. The blade's lament ceased, replaced by a cold, quiet satisfaction. It had reached its full, sorrowful potential. Xingai's spiritual core stabilized, not through peace, but through the integration of the overwhelming sorrow. He had successfully harnessed the river's power. He stood up on the altar, drenched in the clear and visible energy of grief. He was stronger than ever, but devoid of all simple human emotion. His eyes, the color of glacial meltwater, held a new, chilling emptiness. The prophecy demanded sorrow, and he had paid the ultimate price. His reward was the heart shield of desolate truth, a perpetual spiritual defense that transformed emotional pain into an unbreakable barrier. The Shadow Walkers, now standing together on the bank, observed the transformation with a profound professional dread. They had faced powerful cultivators before, but never one who utilized pure despair as a weapon in defense. Xingai looked at them. He knew he could not outrun them forever, but now he did not need to. No, he took the Star Eater blade, fully empowered, and used the celestial gale step to launch himself high into the air, over the river. His trajectory was clear. The slate map pointed toward a distant final nexus point, the Temple of Shattered Oaths. He was no longer running from his fate. He was walking directly toward the tragic culmination of his lineage. The Star Eater was silent, its internal hunger temporarily sated. The sorrow was now his constant companion. He felt the vast, cold presence of the Shadow Walkers trailing him. Their hunt was now a challenge, not a certainty. He continued his flight, leaving the plains of the ascetic behind. The Temple of Shattered Oaths would demand the final, ultimate sacrifice. The Wanderer, the God-Shatterer, had found his purpose. It was a purpose forged in grief and destined for an abyss of loneliness. His heart was the shield, and the sorrow was the key. It was truly the legacy of the wandering god. Xingai's sacrifice at the river of silent tears grants him the heart shield of desolate truth and brings the Star Eater to full power. The Shadow Walkers, now facing a far more dangerous target, must intensify their tactics. The journey leads to the Temple of Shattered Oaths, the final, most devastating nexus point on the map. The tragic end draws closer with every step. The Shadow Walkers are regrouping, and Xingai is stronger, but emotionally empty. Comment below and tell us what terrible oath Xingai must shatter at the next location. Like this video script, share it with your fellow Wuxia fans, and subscribe to Storycraft Studio for Part 5.